I knew I'd regret scheduling that meeting the second I stepped into Stephanie Crawford's vanilla-scented office and saw her little gold nameplate reading VP of Culture. Culture, right. The only culture Stephanie had cultivated was kissing up and punching down, fertilized by her husband's connections and watered with corporate buzzwords. She sat behind her desk like she was running a Fortune 500 instead of our mid-sized tech company, all fake enthusiasm and performative empathy. I came prepared. 25 years of receipts. Hard numbers, cost savings I'd implemented, regulatory nightmares I'd prevented, legacy systems I'd migrated myself during countless weekends. At 52, with college tuition for both kids and 8 years left on the mortgage, I wasn't asking for the moon. I was asking for equity with Austin Pierce, a junior analyst who still thought API stood for a pretty interface. Stephanie gave me that tight-lipped smile that made me feel like I was asking for her kidney. Then she leaned back, twirled her pen, and said, "It's not the right climate for raises, Mike. We need to focus on modernizing our approach." I stayed quiet. 25 years in corporate America teaches you there's power in silence, especially when someone expects you to argue. But then came the kicker. She closed her little leather notebook, pushed it aside like I was yesterday's news, and added, "Maybe consider this feedback an opportunity. We'd love to see you embrace more collaborative energy." That's when something inside me didn't just crack. It crystallized. I sat there nodding like I was processing her wisdom, letting her think she'd handled the situation professionally. I knew better than to react. She wanted me to get defensive, maybe raise my voice, prove I was the difficult old guy they'd painted me as. Instead, I gave her a calm smile. "Thanks for your time, Stephanie. I'll definitely reflect on that feedback. Look, that meeting didn't break me. It woke me up. I wasn't invisible. I was underestimated." And that was about to become their biggest mistake. When I walked out of that office, I didn't vent to my wife or complain to my buddy in IT. I went back to my desk, opened a new document, and started a file I titled Legacy Documentation. Here's what Stephanie missed. Half this company ran on systems I'd built from scratch. The compliance framework keeping our entire operation legal was mine. The back-end infrastructure powering our client contracts and vendor workflows was mine. And she definitely didn't know that 2 years ago, during one of her husband's strategic tax optimization moves, I'd agreed to license that platform under a temporary LLC. Brandon Marshall's idea, my paperwork. It was supposed to be temporary, just a structure to clean things up during a potential merger. There was even documentation that the LLC would remain in my name until further notice. Guess what notice never came? As I watched my access slowly shrink and my projects get reassigned to people who couldn't configure a router, I didn't panic. I documented, quietly, methodically, like a man who'd spent decades building bulletproof systems. The first thing they took was the calendar invites. No warning, no "Hey Mike, we're restructuring the team," just silence where meetings used to be. Thursday compliance syncs, gone. Monday morning architecture reviews, vanished. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I even emailed Lisa from operations. "Hey, looks like I got dropped from the stakeholder list. Mind re-adding me?" No reply. A week later, I asked in person. She blinked twice, looked like she was about to say something, then just said, "I think Stephanie's streamlining workflows. Maybe talk to her." Stephanie, queen of synergy and soft terminations. That Monday, my 2 direct reports got reassigned. Just like that. No transition meeting, no project handover. They were told I was focusing on strategic back-end initiatives and wouldn't be needing a team anymore. Strategic back-end initiatives. Right. They'd gutted my team just to see how long I'd function without support. Then came Austin Pierce's meteoric rise. Austin, who once asked me if cloud infrastructure meant the servers were literally in the sky. Suddenly, he was the rising star, spouting ideas I'd documented in internal reports months earlier. Verbatim. "Maybe we need a proactive compliance monitoring system," he'd say in meetings. "Something automated with dynamic triggers." Sounds familiar, Austin? Almost exactly like the document I shared during Q2 planning that you were too busy updating your LinkedIn to read. I sat through those meetings like a man watching his own funeral. Stephanie would nod thoughtfully at Austin like he'd just invented fire, while the rest of the room bobbed along in groupthink harmony. Every part of me wanted to stand up and start listing dates, commit logs, design documents, but I didn't, not yet. Instead, I started making copies. I pulled every system credential, every architecture document I'd authored, every version log with my initials stamped next to the timestamp. I exported everything to an encrypted drive, backed it up twice, then emailed it to myself with the subject line, "Professional documentation, do not delete." I included my original employment contract, the NDA from the LLC formation, even a photo of that sticky note with Brandon's signature and the words M. Thompson retains LLC until ownership transfer. They thought they were erasing me from the equation. I was building the case they didn't know they'd have to answer for. Every time I passed Stephanie in the hallway, she gave me this corporate smile like she'd already planned my exit interview. Once she even asked, "How's the new headspace, Mike? Must be nice having fewer meetings." "Productive," I said. "Very productive." She giggled like I'd complimented her leadership style and skipped off to her next culture initiative. They thought reducing my visibility meant reducing my value, but I'd never worked for applause. I worked in the engine room, and engine rooms remember everything. The email subject line made my teeth itch. Exciting new synergy review process. Let's grow together. Stephanie had apparently decided what our company needed wasn't better infrastructure or reduced technical debt. It was mandatory team synergy reviews. According to the rollout presentation, which included a slide titled Empathetic Disruption, we'd all be assessed quarterly on how well we cultivated warmth and participated in collaborative optimization. I'd spent the last 25 years preventing six-figure compliance fines and rebuilding legacy platforms held together with digital duct tape. Now my job security depended on how often I used exclamation points in Slack. You ever seen a man with 2 engineering degrees and a quarter-century of infrastructure expertise get a needs attitude adjustment rating? That was me. In the review form, Stephanie wrote, "Mike is highly knowledgeable but can come across as detached and resistant to change. We'd love to see more adaptive energy in his contributions." Adaptive energy. Lady, I was one failed migration away from watching this entire operation collapse, but sure, let me work on my enthusiasm. The real wake-up call came 2 days later when I tried to run a routine check on our third-party vendor compliance logs and found myself locked out. Permission denied. I refreshed the browser. Tried again. Denied. 20 minutes later, one of the interns messaged me, "Hey Mike, do you know why our vendor compliance dashboard is showing all zeros?" Of course it was showing zeros. That system ran through access permissions I'd configured. They thought they could remove me from the infrastructure like I was an expired password, but they forgot the infrastructure needed me to function. I didn't reply to the intern. I just logged the failed audit in a spreadsheet labeled System Dependencies and tucked it away in my documentation folder. From that point forward, I turned every failure into ammunition. Every time a sync process crashed, every time a monitoring script timed out because someone didn't understand the difference between a service restart and a hard reboot, I documented it. I opened a new file titled Critical System Authorship and began cataloging every component I'd built. Compliance Monitoring Framework, authored by M. Thompson, 2019 Audit Response Automation, written by M. Thompson, 2020 Vendor Integration APIs, designed by M. Thompson, 2021 Security Protocol Updates, implemented by M. Thompson, 2022. I pulled access logs, saved commit histories, took screenshots of message threads where I'd solved problems that stumped entire teams armed with Google and Stack Overflow. I started acting like a guest in my own workplace. Polite, responsive when asked direct questions, but never volunteering more information than required. Stephanie liked to think she was leading some kind of digital transformation. What she didn't realize was that she was systematically dismantling the infrastructure that kept the lights on. One afternoon, she stopped by my desk with a coffee mug that said, "Innovation happens here," and chirped, "We'd love for you to join the mindfulness lunch session next week." Just some breathing exercises and team bonding. "I'm allergic to mandatory enlightenment," I said. She laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. That week, she sent out a company-wide email announcing a platform modernization initiative, encouraging all departments to collaborate cross-functionally to reimagine our technical foundation. Translation: they were going to try rebuilding the systems I'd created without me, based on Austin's fresh perspective. Good luck with that. Hope you brought life preservers, because I'd already started talking to someone. Not a friend, not a recruiter, a lawyer. The meeting that started this whole mess happened on a Tuesday 2 years ago. Not the kind of meeting with wine and handshakes. This was a beige conference room, stale bagels, and a printout titled Organizational Restructuring and Compliance Entity Management. Brandon Marshall, our director and master of corporate doublespeak, leaned over the table with that practiced charm, pointing at a flowchart that looked like someone had tried to diagram a migraine. So to streamline our books before the next audit, he said, we need to move the compliance platform temporarily into an external entity. I remember staring at him like he'd just asked me to donate a lung. He kept talking. Not permanently, just a quick LLC setup. You'd be the technical contact since you built it, but we'd transfer ownership back after the restructuring. Standard tax optimization. Legal says it's routine. Standard my ass. But back then I trusted him. Or at least I trusted that he needed me more than he needed to screw me over. He framed it as recognition. We want you managing this because nobody else understands the system architecture like you do. I took that bait, but I brought my own hooks. I told him I'd agree as long as the LLC remained in my name until ownership was officially transferred. Until then, I'd retain full technical and legal rights. Absolutely, Brandon said. That's totally reasonable. Let's document that. We did, right there with legal letterhead and signature lines. We both signed it. Him with his favorite Mont Blanc pen, me with the suspicion of someone who'd seen too many handshakes turn into lawsuits. I folded the agreement, slid it into my notebook, and wrote one line on a sticky note. M. Thompson retains LLC ownership until formal transfer. BM. He signed that too, half joking like it was just extra paperwork. I'll owe you for this, he said. Yeah, Brandon, you would. Flash forward 2 years. By the time Stephanie was holding her synergy seminars and Austin was plagiarizing my documentation like it was open source code, that memory hit me like a system alert in a quiet data center. It happened while I was cleaning out my desk drawer, looking for an old flash drive. Beneath a pile of cables and conference swag, there it was. Folded neatly, edges soft from time. That original agreement. My signature, his signature, legal language dense enough to stop a freight train. And right on top, pressed to the page like a final stamp of irony, was that faded sticky note. M. Thompson retains LLC ownership until formal transfer BM. Blue ink, his initials. Dated. I held it like it was radioactive, because in that moment I remembered something Brandon had forgotten. He never filed the transfer. They'd built their expansion plans on top of my platform, hired teams, pitched clients, and grown the business. But the licensing rights were still sitting quietly in an entity I controlled. It was like finding a loaded weapon in your basement after someone had robbed your house. The LLC still existed. No dissolution paperwork, no ownership reassignment, just a dormant corporate entity waiting to wake up. I scanned that sticky note, uploaded it to my encrypted folder, then made 3 color copies of the full agreement. That night, I sat on my back deck with a beer, watching the neighborhood lights flicker like network activity on a server rack. They thought I was out of the game. What they didn't know was that I still owned the playing field. I filed the paperwork at 7:30 a.m. on a Wednesday. Online state registration, LLC name unchanged for 2 years, just waiting like a dormant process with my signature still in the registry. I didn't even need to modify the business name, just updated the purpose from temporary compliance restructuring to technology licensing and enterprise system management. I clicked submit. The confirmation hit my inbox like a system coming online. Then came the contract terms. I uploaded the new licensing agreement to the LLC portal, the one my attorney and I had spent weeks perfecting until it was bulletproof. Usage fee, $50,000 per day. Trigger, commercial deployment without active licensing contract. Breach penalty, immediate cease and desist with enforcement via civil injunction. This wasn't posturing. This wasn't some empty HR grievance about being undervalued. This was ownership, on paper, on record, running on the very servers their expansion depended on. They'd been parading around my system like it was community property, copying my architecture into PowerPoint slides and selling it to investors with corporate ribbons attached. So I sent the invoice, not to Brandon, not to Stephanie, certainly not to Austin, who was probably still Googling what intellectual property meant. I sent it directly to the company's legal department, marked urgent review required. The attached document included this line front and center, ongoing commercial usage of M. Thompson Compliance Platform version 3. 2 is subject to contractual licensing terms per updated agreement, effective immediately. The invoice itself was clean. No emotion, just numbers. 1 commercial deployment event, $50,000 per day. Days in active use, projected ongoing. Payment due upon receipt. Just to be polite, I included a note at the bottom. If you believe this invoice was sent in error, please refer to original licensing documentation signed by B. Marshall, dated March 15th. Then I scheduled the email. Not for Wednesday, not for Thursday. Friday morning, 9:05 a.m. 5 minutes after the board presentation was scheduled to begin. Because I knew something they didn't. Legal doesn't usually sit in board meetings unless things get complicated. Nothing says complicated like a $50,000 per day surprise landing in your inbox mid-pitch. Friday arrived with terrifying normalcy. Stephanie walked around in what she called her boardroom power dress, carrying her favorite clipboard and a travel mug labeled "Disrupt Everything." Austin wore a blazer that looked like he'd borrowed it from his older brother, probably practicing his presentation in the bathroom mirror. He cornered me at the coffee machine. "Big day, huh, Mike?" I smiled. "Sure is." They thought they were heading into a celebration. I knew it was a reckoning. Legal was unusually quiet that morning. Too quiet. No printer noise, no phone calls, no rustle of paperwork behind the cubicle walls. Then around 10:15, the silence cracked. An internal message pinged someone in IT. "Can you confirm the primary system we're showcasing is the Thompson Compliance Platform?" 5 minutes later, another ping, this time to finance. "Did we ever complete the licensing transfer from the original LLC? Can't locate documentation." By 10:30, I watched the legal conference room door close. No sound came out. No one went in. I didn't need to attend the board meeting because at that moment they were scrambling. They were finally asking the question they should have asked 2 years ago: who actually owns this technology? Legal had the answer. They'd pulled the state registration, the notarized contract, the complete absence of any transfer filing. The LLC was still active. Still mine. That was the turning point. Not a confrontation, not an argument. Just a fact, quiet, heavy, undeniable. I sat at my desk, drinking lukewarm coffee while a $50,000 invoice detonated the illusion they'd built on top of my silence. The boardroom had been buzzing with that artificial energy corporate teams generate when they think they're about to make history. Fresh fruit nobody ate, sparkling water in glass bottles nobody opened, and a whiteboard with 2025 growth strategy scrawled across it in optimistic blue marker. Brandon was in his element. Italian leather shoes polished, tie perfectly symmetrical, hair strategically styled to look less tragic under fluorescent lights. He paced like a motivational speaker, gesturing just enough to look passionate but not enough to wrinkle his Brooks Brothers shirt. "The numbers speak for themselves," he said, laser pointer dancing across the projection screen. "We're positioned to scale at a velocity that makes our competitors irrelevant." He tapped the slide with a grin that could have sold ice to Eskimos. "And the beauty is, it's all built on our proprietary infrastructure." Our infrastructure. I sat in the back corner, practically invisible. Not even a nameplate. Just the guy who spotted technical errors in real time. The compliance specialist who somehow still got invited because someone needed to fact-check the acronyms. Across the room, Stephanie perched next to Brandon like an enthusiastic backup singer, nodding at everything he said before he finished saying it. She leaned toward the CFO and whispered something about quarterly bonuses looking very attractive if this cleared. I didn't watch her. I just tapped my pen against my notepad, counting seconds. 9:05 a.m. Gregory Martinez, our company attorney, coughed once. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a circuit breaker tripping during peak load. Brandon paused mid-sentence, still smiling. "You okay there, Greg?" Greg cleared his throat and adjusted his laptop screen. No smile, no eye contact. Just the voice of a man who'd already processed 5 stages of legal grief in the past 20 minutes. "Before we proceed with final approval," he said, "there's a licensing issue we need to address." The oxygen left the room. Brandon chuckled like this was just bureaucratic housekeeping. "Licensing? Oh, that's probably about the vendor integration protocols. Yeah, we've got that covered. It's our platform." Greg didn't blink. "Who owns the technology?" Brandon laughed. A full laugh, hands up like, "Come on, guys." "What do you mean, who owns it?" "We've been developing it for years. It's internal IP. The whole back end is housed on our infrastructure." He looked at me. "Mike, didn't we integrate everything under internal operations?" I didn't answer because that question wasn't for me. He was asking the room, asking legal, asking the universe to validate his version of reality. Greg turned his laptop toward the table. One browser tab open, one document displayed. A licensing agreement, dated, notarized, staring Brandon in the face. And just beneath it, the name of the active LLC owner. My name. Brandon's lips moved. No sound came out. Stephanie leaned forward to see the screen and made this tiny noise in her throat. "Wait, that can't be current. Isn't that just some kind of placeholder?" Greg's voice was dead serious. "It's valid. The LLC registration is active and there's no record of ownership transfer, which means all commercial deployment of the compliance framework currently in production is subject to the licensing terms outlined in this agreement." Silence. The kind that doesn't breathe. Brandon's confidence slipped off his face like cheap paint. He looked at Greg, then at the board members, then at me. I didn't flinch. This wasn't a surprise. It was an arrival. The laptop screen glowed like it had a pulse. Greg didn't speak at first. He simply rotated the laptop so everyone could see, the hinge creaking under the weight of what was coming. Brandon leaned in, still wearing that twitchy half-smile executives deploy when they think they can control the narrative. That expression lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then he saw it. M. Sir Thompson Regulatory Systems, LLC, licensing agreement effective March 15th. Signed, Michael Thompson, co-signed, Brandon Marshall. I watched his face freeze like a hard system reset. He blinked once, twice. The smile didn't fade. It died, rotting right there in real time. Across the table, the board chairman, a man who usually limited his input to strategic eyebrow raises, leaned forward slowly. He didn't speak. He just stared at Brandon like he was waiting for him to finish choking on his own presentation. Stephanie squinted at the screen like the pixels were lying to her. Her mouth opened as if preparing to release another corporate platitude, but instead she stammered, "This can't be right. This has to be some kind of draft or preliminary document." Greg responded to the room, not to her. "This is the executed licensing agreement filed with the Secretary of State, along with notarized signature pages. There is no record of transfer, dissolution, or internal reassignment." He paused for emphasis. "That LLC exists. It is the sole rights holder for the compliance system the company's expansion depends on." No raised voices. No finger pointing. Just silence, and not the productive kind. The kind that crawls up your spine when you realize the foundation you've been building on was never actually yours. Brandon swallowed hard. "But we've been using that system for—" Greg cut him off, almost gently. "Without a valid license." "Yes." Stephanie's eyes darted between faces, looking for someone to throw her a lifeline. "But Mike worked here for 25 years. Doesn't that count for something legally?" I tilted my head, speaking for the first time all meeting. "Depends. You mean legally or ethically?" She flushed red, said nothing. Greg closed the laptop softly, like sealing a tomb. Then he slid a fresh folder across the table. "Per legal protocol, we're advising the board to suspend any forward motion on this expansion until the licensing matter is resolved. In the meantime, the company is considered in breach of licensing terms." The chairman didn't argue, didn't even blink, just leaned back, interlaced his fingers, and exhaled like a man who'd just been handed the first honest document he'd seen in months. I sat still, hands folded, pulse finally steady. Not gloating, not grinning, just present. After months of being marginalized, erased, and turned into a ghost in my own architecture, I was suddenly the most real thing in the room. The irony was perfect. They'd done it all to themselves. Cut me out, stepped over me, stripped away my meetings and recognition and fake culture awards. But they'd forgotten one thing. Ownership isn't about applause. It's about documentation, and mine had just rewritten their future. The board reconvened after a 20-minute recess that felt like a war council wrapped in damage control. I didn't move from my chair. I knew what was being discussed behind that frosted glass door. Knew the math they were calculating. Daily breach penalties times projected deployment timeline equals corporate suicide. When they returned, the temperature had shifted from caffeinated optimism to cold regulatory dread. The chairman spoke first, voice level as concrete. "We're voting to suspend the expansion project until the licensing matter is formally resolved." No debate, no counterproposal. Brandon didn't object. He didn't speak at all, just stared at the conference table like it owed him an explanation. Then came the second wave. HR was summoned quietly. They didn't sit, just handed the chairman a sealed envelope. The announcement was surgical. "We're asking Director Marshall to take administrative leave, effective immediately, pending internal review." Stephanie made a sound like a smoke detector with a dying battery. "What? Wait! Why am I—" The chairman didn't look at her. "Your appointment was tied directly to his authority. As that authority is now in question, your role is being restructured." Restructured. Not reassigned, not modified. Deleted. No one applauded. No one said goodbye. It was organizational surgery in real time. The chairman turned to me. "Mike, we'd like to discuss a revised contract structure. Competitive compensation, technical authority, commensurate with your expertise. You retain LLC ownership naturally. We'd just like to formalize ongoing platform usage with proper licensing terms." He looked almost embarrassed, like it hurt to acknowledge how thoroughly they'd miscalculated. I nodded once. "I'll review any proposals." They didn't rush me, didn't dare. When I stood to leave, the room shifted like I was carrying something volatile. Not out of respect, out of recognition. They'd all been operating under the assumption that silence equals weakness. Silence had just rewritten their org chart. I walked out into the hallway, the door closing behind me like punctuation on an old chapter. No one followed. No soundtrack swelled. Just the soft hum of the HVAC system and the hollow click of my shoes on cheap vinyl flooring. I went back to my desk, logged into my workstation, pulled up the original licensing agreement, and attached it to a blank email. Subject line, per hour discussion, updated terms. No message body. Nothing more needed to be said. I hit send, then I leaned back in my chair. No victory dance, no fist pump. Just breathing, because this wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. The system they'd tried to steal, the engineer they'd tried to erase, both were still here. Still functional. Still owned by the guy who'd built them from scratch 25 years ago. And from now on, they'd pay market rate to keep the lights on. 3 months later, I'm still here. Different office, better view, actual nameplate that says Chief Technical Advisor. The new contract includes veto power over any infrastructure changes affecting core systems, plus licensing fees that make my original salary look like lunch money. Austin Pierce transferred to marketing. Turns out his collaborative energy was better suited for managing social media accounts than managing enterprise systems. Stephanie Crawford found a position at a startup that specializes in culture optimization. I heard they're still in stealth mode, which probably means they're still trying to figure out what they actually do. Brandon Marshall's administrative leave became permanent leave, became a LinkedIn update about pursuing new opportunities in strategic consulting. The funny thing is, none of this was about revenge. It was about something simpler, respect. Professional respect. The kind you earn by showing up for 25 years, keeping the lights on, preventing disasters that nobody sees coming because you prevented them. Sometimes the best way to remind people what you're worth is to show them what happens when they try to operate without you. The system I built is still running. Still processing millions in transactions daily, still keeping us compliant with regulations that could shut us down overnight if we got them wrong. The difference is, now everyone knows who built it, and who still owns it. Let Austin keep his agile methodologies and standing desk. I'll take ownership, documentation, and 25 years of knowing where every critical dependency lives. In this business, you can't disrupt experience. You can only pay for it. Properly.